Revelation 13, as we looked last time, or briefly introduced last time, what we find is the devil working against God's people. And he does this through cultural forces. So here in Rome, he will have the government and then the Roman empirical cult, as it's called. And really, this is just a big fancy way of talking about the Roman religion, in which the emperors and other great men were put up as deities. And in order to participate in Roman life, which was basically anywhere in the world that you could go at that time, in order to participate in Roman life, you had to participate in this Roman worship. You had to offer sacrifices in order to buy food. You had to be a part of a particular pagan guild that demanded worship in order to get a job. This was part of everyday life. It is not the separation of church and state that we are accustomed to, where you can go to church on Sunday, but the rest of the week you can live however you like and no one really asks you about religion. Before Martin Luther, in the latter part of the 1500s, that idea just simply did not exist. Whenever you were a part of a state, you were a part of a church. And you're a part of a church, you're part of a state. So, whenever we get back here to Revelation 13, what we find is that the state and the state-appointed religion is attacking Christianity. Because, of course, the Christians will not confess that Caesar is Lord. They will not say that Caesar is the Son of God. They will not offer worship to these Roman deities, because they will only offer worship to the Lord as God, and will only confess that Jesus is the Son of God. In all of these ways, they are countercultural. Now, I think this helps us today because we are in a similar situation, aren't we? We have various things going on in our culture that are afflicting to Christians, that push us aside, that try to take Christianity and mold us into the image of the culture at large. We need to learn from these ancient Christians how again to be faithful, how it is that we can be right with God and try to win over, not try to clobber, but try to win over our neighbors and friends by sharing the gospel with them, helping them to see the truth and the grace of Jesus so that they can enjoy the blessings of God as well. So as we look here in Revelation 13, if I say Romans, just know I mean Revelation this hour. If I say Revelation in the worship hour, know I mean Romans. All right? So it's one of them. But here, Revelation 13, again John says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns, 7 heads, and 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its head. Again, we see a lot of similarities between two things. Number one, we see some similarities as far as the numerical description with the way that Jesus is described. He is coming into the world, and He is typically associated with perfection, the numbers 10 and 7. But here we see this beast is rising out of the sea. It is a competitor to Christ. And you will see this theme throughout this section, that we have this competitor to true religion. Here the devil, though, is being pictured, as we'll see in just a little bit, this beast rising out of the sea. But we're going to see how that the devil is using these forces in culture to afflict God's people. So in verse 2, the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet was like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion. Again, this calls us back to the visions that Daniel received, so that we have this picture of this beast or this dragon that looks a lot like all these world powers that the Jews have had to deal with in the past. So John is giving us a glimpse of what the devil is doing. He, like with the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans, is using these world powers of Rome and today to afflict God's people, and through persecution striving to draw them away from God. So the beast, at the end of verse 2, he says, and to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. The dragon, of course, is the devil, and he is empowering these forces, just as the Lord empowers His people. The devil here is empowering these anti-Christian forces. And one of its head, there in verse 3, seemed to have had a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Again, I believe I mentioned this last time. Anybody remember what it's called? Fancy Latin name? Okay. But this is called the Nero Revididus myth. And it was really popular in the day, back in the first century. As Nero died in the mid-60s, we see that there was a relative calm, because Nero was just crazy. But after that relative calm, around the late 90s, or the early to late 90s, this man named Domitian became emperor. And like Nero, he was just crazy. I mean, awful. And he ramped up the persecution to rival what Nero had done in the 60s. And so this idea had spread throughout Rome, not just with Christians, but throughout Rome, that Nero had been raised, or that Nero had been born again in the person of Domitian. So here it looks like that this myth of Nero being born again in Domitian is being put forward. That we have this beast that has the mortal wound, and then he is revived, that he is healed. And everyone on the earth dwellers, those that are pagans, they are now following Domitian. They are following this revived Nero. That is really just Domitian. But they worship the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" Notice what's really happening. The crux of the matter is, who are you going to worship? And what's happening? The devil is working through the Roman Empire, through their empirical worship, to force people to worship not just the emperor, but really and truly to worship himself. This is the thing. You remember as the devil tempted Jesus in Matthew 4, that he told the Lord, "If you will just bow down and worship me, I will give you all the kingdoms that have ever been on the earth." And he showed them to Jesus in the blink of an eye. Jesus, of course, refused that. But now Christians are told to refuse that very same thing. Instead of worshiping just the emperor, the reality is that you are worshiping the devil. Always remember that. Whenever you put some idol before your God, whenever you are enjoying something more than Jesus, you are putting that above Him, and in reality, you are worshiping that thing more than you are worshiping Jesus. This is blasphemy, as we see here in Revelation 13. It is blasphemy to put something above our God. Blasphemy to put something in our hearts that is valued more than Jesus. So these individuals worship the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they said, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" Again, echoing the way that God is often described. Who is like God? Who is like this? Well, the answer is no one. But now that same adoration is poured out toward the devil, really. And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words. And it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. This year, this period that we've looked at already, this short time, this 42 months describes a period of persecution. Now, this period of persecution lasts as long as the kingdom lasts, doesn't it? Right? As long as God's people are on the earth, they're going to be persecuted. But it is described in this minuscule way as compared to the 1,000 years that is described for the church, because suffering is just a small part of the Christian life. It has a goal. We have something else. We have a greater promise and greater blessings that make the suffering seem smaller. And so the persecution is described as 42 months. But here we see that it opened his mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming His name and His dwelling, and those who dwell in heaven. Now this fits perfectly with what the Roman empirical cult is doing. They are putting themselves in the place of God. The Caesar will call himself by the same titles that Jesus called himself. So he is uttering blasphemy. And then in verse 7, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given over every tribe, people, and language, and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of the Lamb who was slain. And if anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is taken captive, to captivity he goes. And if anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is the call for the endurance of the saints. There's that last phrase in verse 10 helps us to see the meaning, the message of that section. That there are going to be individuals that are suffering. There are going to be individuals that are persecuted. There will even be individuals that are martyred. But what the Lord wants us to know is, here is a call for the perseverance. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints. Notice that this is something that we must be active in. That we are not just taken care of completely by God, but we must yield to the Lord and work in a compatible fashion with Him. That we must strive with God for our salvation. So we are called to endure. This is really a great way of summarizing the entire book of Revelation, isn't it? That although we have all of these things hurting us, trying us, and bringing heartache to us, still yet here is a call for the endurance of the saints. A call for you to endure. A call for you to persevere. A call for you to hang in there. Despite whatever is going on, you endure and you strive to be faithful. Now, in verse 11, anything before we go on? I know I'm moving a little bit quickly, but I'm trying to move a little bit quickly so you don't get distracted with the pictures. Just look at the message. Remember, I've been telling you that? Look at the message and don't get distracted with the pictures. Is that good? Is that still working out for everybody? All right. Well, let's get here to verse 11. He says, Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. We could look at the first beast and see the emphasis, perhaps, on the Roman government. But here it seems that we have an emphasis on the Roman pagan priesthood. Okay? If there is an emphasis, if we can divide it, we see the first part is on the government, but here perhaps we are emphasizing the pagan worship that is being enforced among the people. Okay? So he says, verse 12, it exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. And it performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. You can see how all of this paganism, how the Roman empirical cult worship is being described here with some detail. As they are claiming to do great miracles, they're claiming to do great signs, even those that would rival what Elijah did. And then they are erecting these great statues and making people to worship them. This would have been very easily seen, I believe, for the original audience of Revelation. They knew all too well what it was like to live beside a pagan temple. How many of you have been to the Parthenon in Nashville? Can you imagine having several of those set up in every city? In every city that you go around, there would be several temples, maybe not quite as grand as that, but there would be several temples set up just like that. What would you think of when you're reading this then? You would think about these pagan priests that are making people worship these idols that they've set up. It was just too easy for the original readers, but here we see it again. Now, we do not have physical temples and idols set up today. But if you're paying attention, you can see how that the culture makes us bow down and worship certain cultural things, certain cultural ideas that are very much anti-Christian, very much against what God would have us to do and believe and practice. You can see how the same thing is happening today that was happening then. The devil is working, and he is still yet striving to get people to worship him as they worship different cultural ideas. Same thing going on, but no actual temple perhaps. All right. Let's see here. Verse 16. It causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. Stop right there, and you can see how, as we've already described, how that if you want to participate in the economy, you first have to go to the pagan temple and offer worship. You have to go to the pagan grocery store, and you have to buy meat that's been sacrificed to idols. And outside of that, you can't buy food. In order to get a job, you have to participate in a guild that is part of a pagan temple, a pagan worship center. It would be like joining a union, but in order to be a part of the union, you have to offer up worship to a particular deity, and you have to be devoted to the service of that deity. You can see then what John is saying. You have to be countercultural. You cannot participate in this pagan system. You can't live like they're living. They are afflicting you, and they are driving you away from God, because the devil's working in all of these things to keep you away from faithfulness. All right? We good? All right. So let's go on here in verse 18. This is one of the fun things that everybody wants to talk about in Revelation, isn't it? Right? Nobody wants to talk about the great hope that we have in Jesus, the beautiful descriptions of heavenly worship, the sovereign providence of God, all the different ways that we can see the Trinity described. Everybody immediately wants to go here to 13:18 and talk about the mark of the beast. All right? Y'all ready? Here we go. So he says, this calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Did all of y'all check your babies when they were born to make sure they didn't have that hidden on them somewhere? No, okay. But this number has to do with the way that it's called in the Hebrew way of gematria, and the Hebrew alphabet is assigned numbers. Okay, and so Aleph is 1, Bayet is 2, Gimel is 3, Dalet is 4, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Het is 5, and so on. Okay, so each one of the Hebrew alphabet is assigned a number. So sometimes you can talk in code if you want to. You can give a number that's actually a name, or a number that represents something. Okay? A number that is actually a name, or a number that represents something. Now, this number, 666, is probably the most abused thing in all of Revelation, and maybe one of the most abused scriptures in all of the Bible. Because people will take this number, 666, using this Hebrew gematria, and try to figure out exactly which historical figure John was warning us about. Okay? Now, there are different ways to do this. One of the most prevalent is to say that this was Caesar Nero. It works Caesar Nero. It doesn't work Nero Caesar, but it does work Caesar Nero. And so this is one of the popular options. What are some other options that have been put forward? Hitler. Who else? President Obama. Ronald Reagan, he works too. I actually came across, just randomly, someone had used this gematria, and the little meme says, "Behold the beast, cute purple dinosaur." Y'all remember Barney the dinosaur? It works. Well, 666 is not about any particular historical figure. Okay? It's not about any particular historical figure. It's just not. People can strive to find exactly which individual this is talking about, but that is something that needs to be left to the strange people on the History Channel. It does not have anything to do with serious Bible study. Okay? So can I just say, stop that? Don't do that. What does the number 7 represent? Complete wholeness. The number 6 then is short of 7. What's falling short of completeness? What's falling short of the glory of God? Sin. That's the very definition of sin. So as we look here in Revelation, we are introduced into one of the Tras Hagion, the threefold presentation of God is holy, holy, holy. Right? Holy, holy, holy. What does that mean? That means that God is the personification of holiness. Holy, holy, holy. Could you do the opposite? Well, sure you could. If you wanted to say sinful, 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 we could then talk about the devil, couldn't we? Right? I mean, this is the way that the Hebrew language works. The way the Hebrew language works is you don't have good, better, and best. Instead, you have good, good, good. Because that's the way they would say the best. Okay? So here, whenever we're talking about God is holy, 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 we're saying that He is the personification of holiness. Whenever we want then to say something is the personification of sin, we say it's falling short. It's falling short. It's falling short. What then is the mark of the beast? It's the one who is falling short of God. The one who is the personification of falling short of God. The one who is the personification of sin. The one who is the personification of falling short. The one who is the personification of not being God. And that's what the number 6 represents. But here we have the trifecta. 6, 6, 6. The one who is completely falling short. The devil. Now that's not quite as fun as trying to figure out, is this Caesar Nero, Martin Luther, the Pope, Ronald Reagan, or President Obama, or Barney the dinosaur? But this is much closer to reality. That instead of 777, we have 666. Instead of holy, 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 we have the one who is sinful, sinful, sinful. Now I know the other is sort of ingrained into our American perspective. Because we want very much for this to talk about some particular person. But that's really a holdover from crazy premillennial ideas. Leave it behind. We good? Anything else on that? All right. Well, let's go on then to chapter 14. He says, Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. Instead of having the mark of the beast, these are the ones who are faithful. And the ones who are yet on earth are described as 144,000. Does that mean that there were literally only 144,000? No, I don't think so. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that the first 144,000 Christians get to go to heaven, and then the rest of us are stuck here on earth. But I don't believe that is the case. Here the 144,000 is again just a multiple of 12, isn't it? And we've already seen the 24 elders. We have already seen how John is using the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles to display the fullness of God's people. And so I propose to you today that this 144,000 is just another way of saying the complete number of God's people. That we're not looking at an actual literal number, but that we have those who are faithful, those who are kept by God, those who are keeping God faithful in at the heart of their lives. So, he says, I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him the 144,000, who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like a roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. And the voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song before the throne, and before the living creatures, and before the elders. Here we have a beautiful presentation of the sound. That it's like rushing water. It's like the sound of harpists. It is beautiful, in other words. And this new song, that probably calls us back to Moses' new song. After the redemption, we have this song of Moses in which he praises God for washing away the Egyptian army. Now we have this group of people who understand that God is eventually going to wash away whatever worldly powers the devil is using to afflict them. And so they begin to sing this new song. And no one could learn this song except for the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is those who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is those who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as the first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth was no lie found, and they are blameless. Now in this description, again we have purity described. But is this all literally true? Do you have to be a virgin to go to heaven? Well, that speaks against to a lot of what God commands us to do, doesn't it? Right? To have children and to raise them up. So what we have here is a figurative description that pictures for us the purity of these individuals who have not given themselves over to the immorality of paganism. Especially, probably, as you look to the pagan temples, where the pagan priestesses were also cult prostitutes, and some of the men were as well. And so in order to be described as faithful, they are the ones who have not defiled themselves with women. Which women? Probably the pagan prostitutes. Okay? The pagan cult prostitutes. That make more sense? All right. So then in verse 6, he goes on and he says, Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, Fear God and give Him glory, because the hour of His judgment has come. Worship Him who made heaven and earth, the sea, the springs of water. So then we have this call for endurance. We have again another angel here in this last three to see that God is yet working, that God will eventually be victorious. Another angel, a second in verse 8, followed saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. Again, this is probably talking initially about the Roman pagan worship, but we can see a lot of applications even in our present day, can't we? Another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on its forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. And they have no rest, day or night. And these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Here we have the vindication of the saints. Those who have remained faithful are able to see here that their persecutors will be persecuted. And we see some interesting notes about this judgment. Those who have given themselves over to enjoying paganism, they will drink the wine of God's wrath, the Bible says. You can probably see a contrast between their banqueting, their feasting, and then what God will do to them for eternity. That they will drink the wine of God's wrath poured full strength. At this time, in the first century, it was the custom. And by custom, it was a huge social mores to break this. If you were to drink wine, to have it mixed with water on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 part wine and then 5 parts water. But here we see it is full strength, poured out against these people, not mixed, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, here in verse 10. Very often we speak of hell as the place where God is not. That's not quite accurate. You see here that God is still yet pictured as being present. We often think of hell as the place where sinners go so the devil can afflict them. Well, that also is inaccurate. Hell is a place prepared for the devil and his angels. Who's doing the punishing in hell? God is. I think that makes it all the more fearful, don't you? That it is not a place where the devil is hurting us. It is a place where God himself is punishing us. There they will be punished in the presence of the Lamb and his holy angels. And how long does the smoke of his torment go up? Forever and forever. This is a way the Bible describes timelessness, eternity. Just this week, I was on Facebook on a group for preachers of churches of Christ, and I was so sad to see that several influential brethren said that hell only lasted for a little while, if it exists at all. What does the Bible say here? It says that hell lasts forever and forever. When you look at the end of Matthew 24, you see very clearly that hell lasts as long as heaven lasts. That it is not a place where, as Edward Fudge says, you're punished for a little while and then you go out of existence. But instead, it is a place of eternal, conscious torment. Forever, forever, and forever. And so again, we see this picture here in Revelation. As they are tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Again, John says, here is a call for the endurance, for the perseverance, for you to hold on. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. You see what we have to look forward to. That we get to enjoy heaven. That this life is preparation. In this life we are the church militant, the church at work. But then finally we will be the church at rest. The church at home, the church at peace. Blessed are they who die in the Lord. In verse 14, he says, Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man. It's Jesus. With a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. You see the imagery here, don't you? We often talk about the grim reaper around Halloween and such. But who is doing the reaping here? It's the Lord Himself, the God-man, the one who sits on the cloud and reigns as God, but He is also the one like the Son of Man. And so, in verse 18, he says, Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the great harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. Now there's an imagery that everyone would have been familiar with, as the grapes would have been thrown either into a wine press that people would stomp out and get the liquid, or something that you would have there with the grapes and then a stone on top of it until all of the juice was gotten from the grapes. Or either way, you would also have a press, but either way, you can see the imagery of the wrath of God being poured out against those who chose Satan over Him. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia, or 184 miles. This is a picture of God's wrath being poured out on those who have afflicted His people. All right, we're going to stop there in chapter 14, and we'll start 15 next week, Lord willing. Any comments or questions or thoughts or anything? Hopefully this is a really practical type section. I know you can get distracted with the pictures, but hopefully it's a really practical section that you can see the message rather clearly. Anything? All righty, well, we'll start with chapter 15 next week.